tour, and it's a nice place to meet, so nice to meet all you Eagle Press folks. I'm David Anderson, and I work with the nonprofit Sacred Lands. My parents are the managers, I suppose, of Sacred Lands. I do a guided history tour called the Jungle Prada Site History Tour on the location. Just quick question, has anyone been on that tour? Has anyone seen? You got a couple people, yeah, very good. I see familiar faces. Yeah, very good. But the majority have not. Well, it's a historic site in West St. Pete, and so y'all are part of the West St. Pete community, and I think we have a really deep and interesting history here in this part of town that not a lot of people recognize, and so I promote that, and I give history tours, kind of explaining some of what I call a hidden history of West St. Petersburg. And I think that the place where I do my history tour, which I call the Jungle Prada Site, many know it as Sacred Lands, that's the name of the nonprofit that's based there my parents run. So I think that that's just the most important historic site in St. Petersburg, west, east, or any direction. And I make that argument every day on my tour. And so I kind of want to just briefly lay out why I think that and make my argument to y'all, why I think this is such an important history that we have in this side of town. And we'll see what you think after that. If you have any questions, I'll try to leave time. But the first thing I want to say is that the location where I do the tour, and really all along the coast of Boca Ciega Bay there, was part of a Tocobaga Indian village, a place where people lived for about 600 years. And I brought some of my little handouts I showed during the tour, but I carry around a map of the Jungle Prada village that was drawn by an artist in the 1990s. And I like to show this when I talk, just to make a couple of quick points. One, that the village was bigger than any one piece of property. It was all along the coast of Boca Ciega Bay. So I do a tour on one lot that's been in my family for 85 years. But the village was all along the coast. Think from kind of maybe Central Avenue all the way to Bay Pines Hospital along the coast of Boca Ciega. Where I do my tour is what I call at the ceremonial center of the town. And so on this map I show, our lot where I hold this tour is the center of this map. And when I take people around, I show them the plaza and the main midden. So I don't know if you can look at any of these in the back, by the way, later on if you'd like. But the plaza here in the middle looks like a flat area on this map. And I tell people to think of it like it's the town square. So it's not where the Tocobaga people necessarily built homes. They tended to live all spread out along the coast of West St. Pete, where the fresh water was. Nobody wanted to carry water very far in a heavy clay jug, so they lived near the springs and the creeks and with their extended families. But when those family groups came together for things like business and trade and ceremonies and events and sports and games, they came to the plaza, which is a flat area here in the middle of the map, about the size of a modern football field, except the people who lived along the coast built the plaza up to 12 feet above sea level using a foundation of seashells and covered with sand. And I always make the joke that nobody had to tell the Tocobaga to buy flood insurance. They knew 12 feet was a good number. Behind the plaza on this map is the main midden, which I call the best preserved American Indian mound in Tampa Bay. Not the only one or even the most well-known. Since y'all live in town, there are probably better known Tocobaga mound sites at Philippi Park in Safety Harbor, and Weeden Island on the other side of St. Petersburg, and Pinellas Point by the Skyway Bridge, and even over the Skyway in Palmetto, there's Madeira Bickle and Emerson Point Preserve. But of all the Tocobaga sites you can visit in Tampa Bay, ours is the only one where not only will you find the original seashells, like the 500 to 1,000-year-old seashells they used to build up the landscape, but it's covered in pottery, animal bones, other artifacts, small tools, and the archaeologists who were there for 4 years in the 1990s called the site archaeologically pristine in their official report, which I have a couple copies of, and I thought that was a nice compliment from the scientists. The name of the people I'm talking about who lived in West St. Pete at this time, we call the Tocobaga, and the Tocobaga are not necessarily the first people to live where we live. According to archaeologists, human beings have lived in this part of Tampa Bay for more than 14,000 years. So going all the way back to the last big ice age, you can go to the Seminole History Museum and see woolly mammoth bones, and there were saber-toothed tigers, and people were hunting those animals 14,000 years ago. I kind of doubt those first people called themselves Tocobaga. The people I keep calling Tocobaga may be descended from those first people, but actually they lived in this part of town around 1000 AD. Ours is a Safety Harbor culture site, and that period is about 1000 to 1600. So if you look at the big timeline, they're actually much closer to our time than to the people 14,000 years ago. There might be an unbroken chain that goes for 13,000 years from the Ice Age to the Tocobaga living here, but they might have come later in a different wave of migration. I always joke that Florida is very famous for waves of migration. I'm sure you all are familiar. The most recent migration, as far as American Indians go, brought us the Seminoles. So today we have the Seminole tribe of Florida, and that's who represents the American Indians in our community today. I always describe them as a melting pot. The Seminoles are people from the whole southeast of the United States. They're not just from Florida, but they include people from Florida. They're Miccosukee and Yamasee and Muskogee and Creek and Cherokee, and they lived all over the southeast. But in the 1700s, really 16 and 1700s, as the British and the European influence was growing, some of those folks in the southeast left their homelands by choice. Some left under pressure, but they ended up coming to Florida and being known as the Seminoles. But I say that nobody called themselves a Seminole until probably the 1700s, and that this village that I'm describing was a village in the 1500s. And they were the people living here when the first Europeans arrived in our area, the Spanish. And the Spanish wrote down that when they arrived in the 1500s that there were Tocobaga people living here. And that brings me to the second big part of the history that I talk about at our site, because in addition to being a Tocobaga site, we're also recognized as a Spanish landing site. And I think more people around West St. Pete are going to know about this in the very near future, if they don't already. The Narvaez expedition, we think, landed on the west coast of Pinellas County. And if you've never heard of Panfilo de Narvaez, I forgive you, because I grew up right here, and they never ever taught it in school when I was growing up. But they do now, I'm letting you know, to the fourth graders in Pinellas County Public Schools. And I get fourth grade field trips. I've had 3 of them in the last month on this tour. And I say when those kids grow up, it's going to be common knowledge. So I'm getting everyone else ready in the meantime. And when I tell this,
been there on Park Street forever.
Yeah, the sign's been there, yeah. So the sign, and I can diverge, there used to be a concrete sign that probably y'all remember that said, "Here landed Panfilo de Narvaez." I'm sad to say that sign is not there anymore on the corner. A couple of years ago, it started falling apart on the bottom, and you could see the rebar exposed down there. And the city, instead of replacing it with the same style sign, we went ahead and got there's an official state historic marker, one of those blue metal signs instead. But I do kind of miss the old sign. Maybe one day we'll get the concrete one back up there. It was kind of interesting visually. But anyway, yeah, when I talk about the Narvaez expedition, these are the main characters of the story. I printed some little drawings from the internet. But the black and white drawing here is supposed to be Panfilo de Narvaez, a one-eyed conquistador from Valladolid, Spain, who was missing his right eye, which he lost in Mexico. But when he came to Florida and landed in western Pinellas County in the year 1528, he was the governor of Florida. The King of Spain, Charles V, had named Panfilo Narvaez the Adelantado of Florida, and that is like a military governor. He was our second Spanish governor here. So after Ponce de Leon, he was the first. And before Hernando de Soto, he was the third. Came Panfilo Narvaez. But whenever I tell the story, it's not about Narvaez. In fact, he dies in the story. The main character is this other guy, one of the soldiers who came with Narvaez, a man named Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca. And if anyone speaks a little high school Spanish, Cabeza is your head. Vaca is a cow, and the guy's last name is Cowhead. Alvar Nunez, head of the cow, direct translation. All I want to say about this for right now is out of the and maybe I can go into more detail if there's questions, but out of the 300 soldiers and 42 horses who landed on the west coast of St. Pete, Boca Ciega Bay, we think, in the year 1528, and walked north to look for gold, of the 300, only 4 survived. And those 4 survivors did so by walking from here, where we are, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the west coast of Mexico over 8 years, 1528 to 1536. This is like a true story. I encourage everybody to Google this and start reading the articles. Like, it's out there. Whenever I have a big tour, I joke you can Google it and read the Wikipedia articles. But I tell the full story on the tour, and I answer any questions people might have about what compelled them to make this journey and how the facts of it went down. but I'll save that one for when y'all come for the tour, the full details. I'll answer some questions. But there's one more kind of subject I want to talk about here. When I kind of give an overview, there are three main subjects I have, like a three-part thing. So I always mention the Tocobaga who built the mounds, and the Native American history is a huge part of what I discuss. The Spanish landing, that's I think going to be a big story going forward for our local history, and more people are going to know about it. But I also like to mention why our place is called the Jungle Prada site, and kind of how my family ended up there, because it is a family-owned piece of property, and I'm so into it because I'm part of the family. There's a really short answer for why the place is called Jungle Prada. That's the name for the building that y'all know that's called Jungle Prada, so we can kind of close the case pretty quick on that one. The building is Jungle Prada, I call it the Jungle Prada, but it's a kind of interesting building. I carry a picture of the Jungle Prada from the 1920s, and I have a colorized version from a postcard from the 1930s. So the Jungle Prada was built in 1925, and according to the builder, a man named Walter P. Fuller, that should sound kind of familiar, according to him, this was the very first modern strip mall in Pinellas County, the first strip mall in St. Petersburg for sure, and that's what it used to be, was a shopping mall. It was originally called the Jungle Prado with an O. All my pictures say Jungle Prado, and I learned along the way it was named after the Paseo del Prado, which is a famous street in Havana, Cuba. But it was a shopping mall. There were 11 stores, a restaurant, a drugstore, an auto garage, a clothing store, a craft store, a bait shop, a fishing pier. The builders were the Fullers. It's a father and a son. It's Walter P. Fuller's the son, and the father was H.W. Fuller, and they're developers. And so H.W. bought the Paso Grill Hotel in 1914. They used to run steamboats from the Gulfport Casino over to Paso Grill. They owned streetcars, a streetcar franchise, and in 1908, the Fullers purchased 3,000 acres in a part of St. Pete called the Jungle for all the big trees. The first thing they built was a streetcar from the downtown part of St. Pete, and I carry here a picture of the 1913 streetcar on Central Avenue. That's Central Avenue, about 1913. And I have a postcard version of it as well. It's the same picture, but just kind of made pretty. And it says up here in the corner, seen in the jungle at De Vista, showing car arriving from St. Petersburg, Florida. So De Vista is just north of Central Avenue. This trolley started downtown St. Pete, went 7 miles across what's now Central Avenue, all the way to Boca Ciega. Today there's a bridge, the Treasure Island Causeway, was first built in 1939. We're on the 2007 version of that. But when the trolley got to the water before there was a bridge, it turned right and went right along the coast. And where the trolley turned, the Sunset Hotel opened up in 1916, and that's now called the Crystal Bay. The Crystal Bay Hotel on Central is the Sunset. But the Fullers didn't, and it's still called Sunset Park across the way, but the Fullers didn't own it. The family that owned all the real estate had leased out part of their land, and what they were doing in the meantime was building a golf resort. And not just any golf resort, one of the country's most famous golf course designers actually built the course. A man named A.W. Tillinghast built the golf course, and the Fullers opened a luxury hotel called the Jungle Hotel and Country Club. The Jungle Hotel is also still there, but today it's called the Admiral Farragut Military Academy. So the Admiral Farragut Academy was the Jungle Hotel. And to give the guests who came to the two hotels now places to shop and eat and hop on a boat to the beach, the Fullers built the trolley all the way to Elbow Lane and built the Jungle Prado, the shopping mall. So by day it was a shopping mall, but at night I do have to include in this, there was a nightclub, which many of you might have heard. It was called the Gangplank, and it became a speakeasy during Prohibition where they sold liquor in the 20s. I found a colorized postcard of the Gangplank nightclub, and I have a picture from the newspaper, from the old newspaper, of the Fullers. So if you ever want to know what Walter Fuller looks like as a young man, this is your cool 1920s hosts, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Fuller, and they're in their early 30s. So Walter Fuller here is 32 years old, but he got older and wrote a book called St. Petersburg and Its People, and you can find this actually for free online, but USF published it. But in the book, he tells the story of how he got liquor for a speakeasy. So he says, we're building all this stuff, you know, golf course, hotel, shopping mall. Most of our equipment comes by boats. The trolley was kind of a rough way to transport things. So one day a man came delivering palm trees, only Fuller said I didn't order palm trees. So we went to the water, and hidden on the boat, under the palm trees, was 100 cases of liquor during Prohibition. Whiskey, he says. And Walter Fuller's line from the book that I always quote was, I bought the whole thing, the boat, the booze, and the trees. So we stored the alcohol at a vacant home, and at night we'd push it over in a wheelbarrow to the Jungle Prado, and they would sell it there at the nightclub. And that brought famous people, so I'm always trying to find out more about this, but if y'all been here for long, there's stories of Babe Ruth and Al Capone being there. I'm still open to new information, but as far as finding proof for that, for Al Capone, I've never actually found what I call physical evidence. Like, I've got no pictures of Al Capone, I've got no signatures on documents. What I have is what I call circumstantial evidence. So it's local stories and eyewitness accounts, and it's a hotel register from the Jungle Hotel with 20 known Al Capone associates on the guest list. They ran up a $5,000 bill in 2 weeks at the golf resort. The man who signed the bill was named Johnny Torrio. He was a bootlegger. Al Capone and him were very close. Torrio and Capone were 2/3 of the Manro Company that was buying real estate in Pinellas, especially by Twin Brooks Golf Course. And so no pictures of Al, but his friends are up the road, there's liquor at the club, and he's buying property, and he might have been involved in all this. When I started looking up Babe Ruth, though, it was much easier to find pictures. So I want to show you a couple. I've got a picture of Babe Ruth, and the newspaper headline says, "Golf lures Babe Ruth to Jungle Course." The New York Yankees spring train in Tampa these days, but from 1925 until 1961, they spring train in St. Petersburg. Babe Ruth played over 100 rounds of golf at the Jungle Golf Course, used to be right over there, called it my favorite golf course in Florida, and had 3 birthday parties at the Jungle Hotel, now the Admiral Farragut. And I found lots of pictures of Babe Ruth's golf birthday parties. So he was definitely here.
Just real quick, that makes sense because I think he owned a condo downtown St. Pete.
Yeah, he stayed at the Florey de Leon downtown some, which used to be,
The
I think,
penthouse
yeah.
still has stuff with Babe Ruth's.
So he was all over town, but there was a couple seasons, I think it was late 20s, like 26, 27, 28, that he was in the west side of St. Pete, and actually there's a Babe Ruth house across the street, across from the bay on Sunset Drive North, and so that's one of the places he lived. There's some other places too that he stayed over these different springs, but he's one of these pictures, I don't have it here actually, he's kind of sitting with Al Lang on the golf course, so there's a lot of pictures of Babe, more than I could print. So this is having a pretty good start, all this golf resort business of the Fullers. But unfortunately, I'm going to kind of bring this to a close because it didn't last very long. The timing was bad. All this is going on in the late 1920s. So I'll tell you, the hotel opened up in December of 1925. You had all of 26, 27, and 28, but then in 1929, the stock market crashed, and it was a very promising start to a boom here in West Pinellas. Suddenly went bust. And for the Fullers, it was a bad time to own a golf resort in the jungle. And they held on for years. During the 30s, they actually ran a radio station called WSUN out of the Jungle Hotel. But in the 40s, the Fullers sold their properties, and the whole family moved to Bushnell, Florida, where they still live today. I met one of the sons. They sold the Jungle Hotel in 1945 to a New Jersey-based military school called the Admiral Farragut Academy. They sold their Jungle Prado, still called Prado with an O, to a family who made it a hotel called the Jungle Prada Inn. That's actually when the O changed to an A. It was in the early 1940s when they made it a hotel. And so the oldest document I found that says Jungle Prada was a hotel layout from the early 1950s at the Jungle Prada Inn. And on the back of this document is a menu from the restaurants where all the dinners are $1.75. And then, lucky for my family, when the Fullers are selling all their real estate here, their 3,000 acres, they sell one particular 3-acre lot that includes the last best preserved of these Indian mounds from the village in the year 1940 for $20,000 to these people, and these are my grandparents, and so that's why our place is kind of a family affair. And the man in the picture, his name was Harold C. Anderson, but everybody called him Happy, Happy Anderson. He was born 1905, died 1997, so 92. Born in New York, but grew up in St. Pete, went to St. Pete High School, and in 1948 he opened a family business where y'all can still shop. It's called Anderson Lumber Company on 49th Street. So yeah, I see some nods, y'all know that one. For all your exotic hardwood, I say go see Cousin Fred, and he's the pro. But in my career, I never took after the lumber company side of the family. I took after my grandmother, who was a gardener. Grandmother Frances is seen here in a wheelchair. She had polio, and most of her life she was stuck in a wheelchair. But despite that, she raised 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. She was the office manager and switchboard operator for Anderson Lumber for years, and she was a professional gardener, a landscape designer. She helped get what was called the Suncoast Botanical Garden off the ground. That's now Florida Botanical Gardens. And we have a big greenhouse. Her greenhouse is converted into a museum on our property. So I take after grandmother. I became a Florida certified horticulture professional. I worked part-time at Sunken Gardens. I worked full-time at the Florida Botanical Gardens, the Suncoast became. In 2017, I quit working for the county at the Botanic Gardens and started a single-member LLC called Discover Florida Tours, so I could offer a history tour at the family home of the Indian Mound and impart this information plus much more. So what I've basically told you is my intro speech in a nutshell. I've kind of changed it just a little bit, but that's basically how I start the tour. And then I take folks all around and I talk about native plants used by the Tocobaga, discuss how the peacocks got there, that's a whole story, take people up to the Tocobaga Mound and discuss, speculate at least, as to why they built the mounds here. And then I tell the full story of the Narvaez Spanish expedition at the end of the tour. So I encourage y'all to come, and my wife's got some flyers here. I'm always trying to spread it, especially to local people. You know, I'll just say, oh, they're up there. I'll just say, when I started this business, I try to position myself at first where the tourism is. You know, I want the people coming on the airport and going to the beaches and stuff. But somewhere along the way, I realized the people I actually want to reach are people like y'all, people who have lived here for a long time and have done everything there is to do in town, but I'm not a great marketer, so they haven't actually picked up my flyers yet. And so this little meetings are a great opportunity to meet some of y'all folks, local people, and talk to you about what we have here in West St. Pete, which again I think is a really important historical area that doesn't get appreciated all the time. But thanks for listening. If you have questions, I can talk to y'all. Thanks for having me speak. Yeah, question?
Are there any special times or days that
Yes.
you do the tour?
Yes. So I've been doing it like a business. My father for years has been doing a Sunday 4 o'clock tour for his nonprofit, but I started doing it myself 5 days a week. So the flyers say Wednesday through Sunday, 11:30 and 2:30. And I had one this morning, but not an afternoon. So the 2:30 tours start to get a little iffy when it gets hotter. But I have a website where you can buy your ticket online, and there's a phone number which you can call. But generally the schedule is Wednesday through Sunday, 11:30, and sometimes 2:30. But yeah, you can always call or look at the website.
How did the
Yeah, sorry.
how did the peacocks get here?
I will give you a short answer, and then we can talk more about it later on. So I know they're not native to here, and peacocks are native to Asia and India and Indonesia. The peacocks were brought to Park Street, to our particular neighborhood, by a family called the Rothmans. And the Rothmans are the founders of Kane's Furniture, and they have a house on Park Street, and they brought the first peacocks. I talked to the Rothman family several times and actually asked them where they got the first 2. And the descendant who I spoke with just a few weeks ago told me there was a feed store on Park Boulevard. But then as I kept on going, it turns out that for 35 years, there was a giant peacock farm in Clearwater called the Seville Peacock Farm, right where Clearwater Mall is, corner of, at the time, Haynes Road and US 19. And my 1939 St. Pete Times article that I clipped says with 500 peacocks at the Peacock Farm, the Seville might be the largest in the world. So I kind of joke, I use Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is most likely correct. The peacocks are from India or world's biggest peacock farm, Haynes Road in Gulf Bay. That's where I think they came from. Yeah.
You mentioned that the Tocobaga came looking for fresh water.
Yeah.
And you mentioned streams and rivers.
Yeah.
Where would they have been?
They're all over. We have still springs. I was recently alerted to a spring at 1250 Park Street that runs down to the bay from there. But, or I think that's right on that stretch. But I can tell you something interesting. There's an oral history that was done with my grandfather before he passed at the Science Center. And actually, he talked about how when he was growing up here, there were several more creeks that ran through West St. Pete to Boca Ciega Bay. And as we started changing the drainage patterns with the stormwater system, it dried up some of the creeks. And so in particular, in this oral history, he says where the Home Depot is, by 66 and 22nd, was a big swamp. And they built that culvert down 22nd Avenue to drain the water. So that culvert that goes down 22nd by Northwest redirects the swamp into the storm system. And Grandpa said that dried up a creek that used to come right through our property. So yeah, there are more creeks then than there are now. That's all.
I assume that Mound Park was also the product of...
Mound Park were the same people, the Tocobaga, and I read at 1.6 Tocobaga mounds lining Booker Creek. And they tore down the first of them to build Mountain Park Hospital, and they tore down the rest when they turned it to Bayfront.
Because when we were kids, we'd go down there and we looked hard enough, we'd find arrowheads.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah, that was a big village, I think.
There's a big mound that runs back behind Bay Pines.
Oh, okay, I'm not aware of a snake mound behind Bay Pines, but I'll have to go look at that. I know about a snake mound at Maximo, but I'm sure the village is all on the coast by Bay Pines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you found any arrowheads or artifacts?
Yes,
that are down there?
yes. So I don't go digging today. I kind of missed the chance when I was a kid. I grew up there, and there were archaeologists there between my ages of 12 and 16, but I wasn't so interested in the history between 12 and 16, so I just rode my bike right past them.
Yeah.
And they were digging there, and what we have is the product of their dig from the 90s in our little museum. And my wife designed display cases like to back the artifacts, but it's real quick. It's 18 small arrowheads, little projectile points made of chert. It's 7 bone pins. We think they were hairpins. It's 6 fishing weights made from shell and limestone, and we have a little set of real Spanish beads that they found on the mound. So and some pottery.
What, follow up, what is a church?
A chert is a type of stone. We don't have a lot of rocks and stones in Florida, but we have limestone, and then the points are made of a rock called chert. And I'm not an expert in that, but I can tell you it's a rock not unlike flint that you can make into like a little you can make into a head or a point. And I suppose we have some in Florida because they reason it.
Do you still hold the Green Frog Festival there?
Oh no, we did until March 2020. There was a big festival every March, and I'm going to share this with y'all because I finally learned what it meant. So I would just abbreviate it to the Green Frog Fest or whatever, but the full name it was always called the Green Frog Moon Festival, and I had no idea why it was called the Green Frog Moon Festival. It's because in the Choctaw culture, the March full moon is called the Green Frog Moon, and we used to have it on the March full moon. We did that March 2020, like March 20th, 2020, and it was the last thing anybody did for about 6 or 8 months with COVID in 2020. One of our organizers doesn't live here anymore, and it might get revived at some point, but it hasn't happened since 2020. But I'd like to do it someday in the future, maybe.
Yeah, how easily is your tour
Pretty easy.
for the walking?
It's an easy walk. It can be a lot of standing. I was going to prepare. I try to put a couple chairs everywhere we stop, but it's kind of it's a 3-acre property, and I take you on a loop around the outside of it to the water, then up to the Indian Mound. It's right on the water, so we go up to the Tocobaga Mound from the water, and we kind of stop in between and talk. But I try to stop where there's seats, but there's no really hard walking. It's a brick driveway.
And how long is the?
75 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
I try to keep it at 75. I usually go 90, and I usually pull into the station before 90.
But the beginning and end are all seated.
And the beginning and the end are all seated. Yeah, the beginning and the end. I start with an intro speech, like a shorter version of what I just did, and then I end with the Narvaez story and seats.
Is it something you can walk with a walker?
I think so. Maybe not every single inch of the property, but you can definitely do the tour with a walker. Sorry, sir. Yeah.
You spoke of a mound that's the size of a football field. Where is it?
Well, it's the plaza is the thing I said was the size of a football field. That's on our property. It's kind of on this map. It's on our lot. So the mound, the mound actually goes beyond our lot. Part of the main mound is at the Jungle Park, and part is at the lots next to us. But the plaza is like right on our 3-acre property, and it's a flat area that's the size of a football field. It's not like a hill, but it's a platform 12 feet above sea level.
I can't see the map from here.
Oh.
Give me an address.
I'll put this over here. I'm gonna put this on the table and you can
What's
look
the
at it.
address?
So there's an address the family uses for the driveway. It's still a residence, but the parking address is the Jungle Park, which I give as 1700 Park Street North.
Okay.
And that's on the flyer too, but 1700 Park Street North. In the back. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the urban myth that the Indian mounds keep the hurricanes?
Very good. I've had to think about that because people ask me about it. I've had to think about that for sure. Yes. Well, we've had a couple big hurricanes even in the last bit of written history. It's been a long time, so I don't want to jinx anything. I don't see any wood around here for me to knock on. But yes, there have been a few big ones in our time, but spread out. The Tocobaga lived here for hundreds of years, thousands of years maybe, and I'm sure they experienced a hurricane at some point along that big stretch, and so I'm sure that they didn't want those, and we're probably, it makes perfect sense, they're trying to do ceremonies to keep the hurricanes away, so I fully believe that the Tocobaga were performing the ceremonies, and if they did perform a ceremony to keep the hurricanes away, I like to think that our mound is the sort of place they would have done it. I view it as like a ceremonial gathering place, and so I think they would have done it there. Now, whether or not that it has the power to keep them away, I leave that to your belief, but I don't want to say a bad word about it, is what I say, so I don't want to jinx it. And when you come on the tour, I've got these little crystals up on the mound, and people always ask, what are these? A lady came after Hurricane Ian missed us to do her own little ceremony, and she left crystals, and I just don't touch them, so.
Somebody pointed out one time, when you look at the map of Florida, that Pinellas sticks out.
It does stick out a lot.
Which means it's not getting hit, so.
Yeah, it's a hard target, but I don't want to jinx anything, so let's not talk about too much.
Unfortunately, what actually signaled the demise? Did we kill the Tocobaga by bringing them disease?
It was disease. It was. I wouldn't say it was intentional, but it was the European disease mostly. I'll just mention the end. This is probably a good thing to kind of wrap up on. Maybe is the Tocobaga were the ones here when the Spanish came. Narvaez, the conquistador of the land that I talk about, probably brought measles and smallpox. His guys got measles and smallpox on their trip. An archaeologist that I trust his estimates, a guy named Bob Austin, once told me that he thinks before the arrival of the Europeans, the population of Florida as a whole was about 400,000 people, and that's just his estimate, but he's an archaeologist, and that within 100 years afterwards, it was 40,000 people. So like most places, the population is like 9/10 are gone within 100 years. There were still people called Tocobaga. I think we do have records of Tocobaga into the 1600s, and maybe they're probably the 1600s, and a lot of them actually at that point where the records come from is they worked for the Spanish as couriers and guides and people who helped transport goods and people. And Spain lost Florida to England in the French and Indian War, like 1763, and they swapped it for Havana, Cuba. And there were a few thousand Spaniards living in Florida, and they went to Cuba, and I think they took most of those Tocobaga who were on record with them, but I still believe there were Tocobaga after that, maybe not so many, when the Seminoles started to arrive. And I know if there was a Seminole person here, when you talk to Seminoles and you ask them, are there any Tocobaga? They'll say us, they'll point themselves, they wear the Tocobaga. And I mentioned the Seminoles, I kind of characterize them as a melting pot, but I do believe that if there were Tocobaga who are still here when the Seminoles began to inhabit the area, which they were in the late 1700s, early 1800s, that they would be part of that culture, they would emerge with that culture. So I tend to believe the Seminoles when they say that they're descended from the Tocobaga, but it's definitely a little more complicated than just a straight line.
Yeah.
But I will say the Tocobaga are considered an extinct tribe for the government, their government status, because there's no one who speaks the Tocobaga language, and it's a gone language, and there's no one who can really trace their ancestry directly to the Tocobaga.
Well, I would like to just tell anybody that has not been to Sacred Lands,
Yeah.
you need to put it to the absolute top of your list of things to do.
Thank you very much. I want to say one more thing just to clarify the difference between my tour and Sacred Lands. So Sacred Lands does other things too. So you might be able to go to, there's other events you can do on that property. So I want to just say for them, my parents started that nonprofit in 2002, and it's a 501c3 nonprofit, Sacred Lands, and they host events right now as we speak. Every other Wednesday, they're having a peace meditation, which is free to come to. It's like a little voluntary meditation for world peace every other Wednesday. Hey, if you're here, like I think it's the last Saturday in April, Hip Expressions Dance Studio is doing a fundraiser. It's belly and fire dancing there. That's kind of fun. But Sacred Lands has guest speakers, and they do meditations and music, and there's a link on my website for them. But I do the history tour. Sacred Lands does all the other meetups and things. So there's lots of stuff goes on there. But please, thank you. Please come. Yeah, thank you. Yes, and then.
Okay. Did they have any burial grounds?
They have burial grounds. They have burial mounds. Ours has been investigated many times, and nobody has ever found a human bone on our property. So sometimes I get, especially like younger people, who that disappoints them. They want to see a burial mound, but for me, it's kind of a big relief because there's a lot more rules and regulations and things for burials. And they've looked, and I'll change my story if that ever changes. But there's no bones there. However. Historically, there have been burials found in Tarpon Springs, Safety Harbor, and Tierra Verde. And I'll just say, I don't know if y'all mentioned the one on Park Street. Last June, someone up on Park Street, if you go Park Street heading towards Tyrone Boulevard, 40th Avenue North is right before Tyrone. You make a left right there, it becomes 85th Street. There's a mound right there that last June someone was expanding their driveway and found human bones. And they called the archaeologists up from the States, and they identified several individuals dating back to the Tocobaga village era. And they spend a month or so deciding what to do, if they're gonna relocate them or what they're gonna do about it. And so far, what I think they've done is just cover it all back up. So you can actually go by there, but there's possibly a newly discovered burial mound just last year, right off Park Street by Tyrone Boulevard, behind Gateway to India. Yeah. Anyway, you can read the paper. It's in Bay News 9 and stuff. You can read about that. So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I know a lot of universities and scientists are doing DNA analysis for ancient peoples. Are they doing anything like that around here?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I'll
Okay.
keep my ears up for anything like that. I'll keep my antennas tuned, but I'm not aware of anything like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm always trying to learn more, though. Okay. Nance. All right. Thank you guys very much.